Arthur, a 68-year-old veteran living on a meager pension, gave his last dollar to a shivering man on the sidewalk. He expected nothing, but 3 hours later, a knock on his door wouldn't just change his life, it would redefine honor itself. The November wind cut through the streets of Millersville with the sharp, unforgiving edge of a serrated knife. It was a wind that found its way through the thinnest cracks in window frames and the deepest layers of worn-out coats. For Arthur Pendleton, a 68-year-old retired Army sergeant, it felt personal, a familiar chill that burrowed deep into his bones, stirring memories of colder nights long past. He pulled the collar of his old field jacket tighter, the fabric frayed at the edges but still carrying the faint, ingrained scent of discipline and distant lands. Ever since his wife, Martha, had passed last spring, the silence in their small, second-floor apartment had become a physical presence. It sat with him at the dinner table and lay beside him in the too-large bed. His pension, once a supplement to Martha's income from the town library, was now a tightrope he walked every month. Today, the rope was particularly taut. In his pocket, a single, crumpled $5 bill was the last of his cash until the check arrived at the first of the month, 3 long days away. His plan was simple and bleak: walk to the corner market, buy a couple of cans of bean soup, and make it last. On his way, he passed the corner bakery, the Sweet Need, which had been Martha's favorite place. The warm, buttery scent of fresh bread still billowed out, a ghost of happier times. But something was different. A new, garish neon sign flashed in the window, and through the glass, he saw a young man with slick back hair and an expensive-looking watch directing employees with impatient gestures. The old, welcoming charm was gone, replaced by a cold, transactional efficiency. Arthur paused, his gaze falling on a small, perfect cheesecake in the display case. It was Martha's favorite. For a fleeting, reckless moment, he considered going in, buying a slice just to feel close to her again. He took a half-step toward the door before his eyes caught the price tag. $9 a slice. His shoulders sagged. It was a different world now, one that had priced his memories out of reach. He turned away, the feeling of loss sharper than the wind, and it was in that moment of private grief that he saw him. Huddled against the rough brick wall of the bakery, almost blending into the shadows, was a man. He was probably a decade younger than Arthur, but hardship had carved deep lines into his face, making him look ancient. He wore a Marine Corps utility jacket, the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem faded but still recognizable. It was far too thin for the weather. The man wasn't begging or calling out. He just sat there, legs crossed, back straight against the wall, a posture of disciplined endurance that Arthur recognized instantly. A small, neatly lettered cardboard sign rested on his lap: Marine. Lost my job. Hungry. Any help is appreciated. Arthur stopped. The $5 bill in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. That was 2 cans of soup and a loaf of bread. That was his dinner for tonight and tomorrow. He looked at the man's eyes. They weren't empty, not entirely. They were haunted, distant, but deep within them was a flicker of something familiar, a stubborn refusal to be broken. The world around them faded away. The traffic, the passers-by, the arrogant new owner of the bakery, none of it mattered. The cold wind was no longer the November chill of Millersville, it was the monsoon rain of the A Shau Valley in Vietnam, 1969. The memory hit him not as a thought, but as a full-body sensation. The slick, sucking mud was over his boots. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and rot. A searing pain shot through his leg where the shrapnel had torn through. He was down, exposed, the sound of enemy fire crackling closer. He thought it was over. Then, a hand grabbed the back of his fatigues. It was a Marine, a kid they called Casey from another platoon, face smeared with mud and grim determination. Casey wasn't much bigger than him, but he dragged Arthur through the mud and chaos, bullets whizzing past their heads, until they tumbled into the relative safety of a bomb crater. Casey, breathing heavily, pulled out his canteen. He took a short sip, then pushed it into Arthur's hands. "Drink up, Army," he'd grunted. "We don't leave anyone behind." It was the last of his water. Arthur blinked, the vision receding, leaving an ache in his heart that had nothing to do with his own hunger. He looked from the bakery's $9 cheesecake to the marine shivering on the cold concrete. The choice wasn't a choice at all. He walked over, his own movements feeling stiff and old. He didn't say much. Words felt cheap and inadequate. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out the $5 bill, and pressed it firmly into the man's cold, chapped hand. "Take care of yourself, Marine," Arthur said, his voice low and raspy. The man looked down at the bill, his eyes widening in disbelief. He slowly curled his fingers around it, as if holding something fragile and sacred. He looked up at Arthur, and for the first time, the distant fog in his eyes cleared, replaced by a wave of raw, overwhelming emotion. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "Thank you, brother," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Semper Fi." "Hua," Arthur replied with a curt nod. He turned and walked away without looking back, the weight in his pocket gone, replaced by something much lighter. The walk back to his apartment was different. The wind didn't seem as cold, and the gray, overcast sky didn't feel as oppressive. Arthur moved with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. He had given away his last $5, an act of profound fiscal irresponsibility, yet he didn't feel regret. He felt solid. Grounded. He had seen a brother in need and had acted on an instinct forged in the fires of his youth, an ethos that transcended service branches and the passage of time. "We don't leave anyone behind." He climbed the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment, the climb feeling a little easier today. He unlocked the door and stepped into the silence. The apartment was meticulously neat, a habit from his years in the service and a tribute to Martha, who loved order. Her photograph was on the mantelpiece, her smile bright and warm. He found himself looking at it as he took off his jacket. "Well, Martha," he murmured to the photograph, "the soup will have to wait a few days. I met a Marine. He needed it more." He imagined her response, a gentle smile, a knowing look in her eyes. She had always understood the parts of him that were still Sergeant Pendleton, the parts governed by an unspoken code. She would have approved. His stomach rumbled, a stark reminder of his reality. He walked into the small kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The sight was dismal, a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of pickles, and a single, sad-looking apple. The pantry was no better. He found a half-sleeve of crackers at the back of a shelf. That would have to do. He sat at his small kitchen table with 4 crackers and a glass of water, the meager meal laid out on a placemat Martha had embroidered years ago. As he ate, his mind drifted back to the man on the sidewalk. He wondered about his story. What battles had he fought, both overseas and at home? What had broken him to the point of sitting on a cold street corner, his pride a tattered flag against the wind of despair? Arthur felt no pity for him, only a profound and aching empathy. He knew how easily the world could break you, how quickly the foundations of a life could crumble, leaving you in the cold. The hours passed slowly. He read a book, the words blurring on the page. He tried watching the news, but the shouting and chaos on the screen felt a world away from the very real, very quiet drama of his own life. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt distant, something for other people to enjoy. For Arthur, the approaching darkness only meant the start of a long, cold night in an empty apartment with an emptier stomach. He sat in his worn armchair, the one Martha had always claimed was his throne, and watched the last light fade from the sky. He wasn't hungry anymore. A strange sense of peace had settled over him, the quiet assurance that, for one moment today, he had been the man he was supposed to be. He had kept the faith. Whatever came next, he would face it. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, the room was completely dark, save for the pale orange glow of a street lamp outside his window. And then he heard it. A knock on his door. It wasn't tentative. It was sharp, firm, and official. not the sound of a neighbor or a delivery. His heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, gave a sudden, nervous lurch. In his experience, unexpected knocks after dark rarely brought good news. Arthur's body tensed. Old instincts, dormant for decades, flared to life. He rose silently from his chair, his movements fluid and quiet. He didn't turn on a light. He moved to the door and peered through the peephole, his breath held tight in his chest. Standing in the dimly lit hallway were two figures. They were soldiers. Their Class A Army dress uniforms were perfectly pressed, the brass on their belts gleaming even in the low light. One was a captain, his rank clear on his shoulder boards, the other was a younger sergeant first class, standing at a respectful parade rest. Confusion warred with alarm in Arthur's mind. This wasn't about an unpaid bill. He took a steadying breath and opened the door, leaving the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady. The captain looked at him, his expression serious but not unkind. "Sergeant Arthur Pendleton?" he asked, his tone respectful. The use of his old rank was disarming. Arthur replied cautiously. "Retired." "We know, Sergeant," the captain said. He gestured to a formal-looking manila envelope in the sergeant's hand. "We're here on behalf of a Mr. Mitch Daly. He's a Marine Corps veteran. He asked us to deliver this to you personally." Arthur's mind reeled. Mitch. The man from the sidewalk. How had he found him? And why were soldiers delivering his mail? A cold dread began to creep up his spine. Had something happened to him? "Is he all right?" Arthur asked, his voice tight. "He is now, Sergeant," the captain said, and a hint of a smile touched his lips. "Thanks to you. May we come in?" "We were given specific instructions." Arthur hesitated for a second, then slid the chain lock free and opened the door wider. "Come in." The two soldiers stepped inside, their presence filling the small, quiet apartment. They stood in the center of the living room, their professional demeanor a stark contrast to the homey, lived-in space. "Sir," the captain began, "Mr. Daly approached the front gate at Fort Hastings about 3 hours ago. He was in distress. He told the MPs a story about a fellow veteran who showed him an extraordinary kindness today. He gave us your name and a general description of this neighborhood. It took us a little while to find the right apartment." The sergeant first class stepped forward and held out the envelope. "He insisted we deliver this into your hands. He said it was a matter of honor." Arthur took the envelope. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. It felt heavy, substantial. He walked over to the table lamp and switched it on, flooding the room with a soft, yellow light. He carefully tore open the flap. Inside were two items. The first was a cashier's check. Arthur unfolded it. His eyes scanned the numbers, but his brain refused to process them. He had to read it 3 times before the reality sank in. $10,000. A gasp escaped his lips. He stumbled back and sank into his armchair, the check fluttering from his grasp onto the floor. $10,000. It was more money than he'd seen in one place in his entire life. The captain picked up the check and placed it gently on the table beside him. "There's also a letter, Sergeant." Arthur reached back into the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a handwritten note. He unfolded it and began to read. "Sergeant Pendleton. My name is Mitch Daly. I was a history teacher before my life fell apart. My wife and son died in a car accident 3 years ago. I've been in a free fall ever since. Today was going to be my last day. I had a plan. I wasn't just hungry, I was empty. I felt invisible. People would walk by and look through me like I was a ghost. I started to believe it myself. I sat on that sidewalk to feel the cold, to feel anything, before I walked to the bridge. Then you stopped. You looked at me. Not with pity, but with recognition. You called me Marine. You saw the man I used to be. The $5 you gave me wasn't money. It was a sign. It was a message from a world I thought had forgotten me. It was hope. Your kindness broke through the noise in my head. It reminded me of the code we both lived by. We don't leave our brothers behind. You, an army man, reminded a Marine of his own honor. This check is from a savings bond my wife and I bought for our future. A future that never happened. I was saving it for an emergency. Well, this is the emergency. Hope is the emergency. You saved my life today, and now I'm paying it forward. I asked these soldiers to bring this to you because I don't have the strength to see you myself. I think the gratitude would break me. Please, use this. Let it be a testament that honor still means something. That we still look out for our own. Your brother. Mitch. Arthur stared at the letter, the words blurring through a film of tears. The weight of it all pressed down on him, the despair, the hope, the incredible, impossible turn of events. He had just wanted to help a man get a hot meal. He had no idea he was standing on the edge of a cliff, pulling a man back from the abyss. He's at the base now, the captain said softly, his voice full of compassion. He's with our chaplains and the VA crisis team. He's safe, Sergeant. He's getting the help he needs because you saw him. You really saw him. Sleep was impossible that night. Arthur sat in his armchair long after the soldiers had departed, the letter and the check laid out on the coffee table before him. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty, it was filled with the weight of Mitch's words and the gravity of his own unintended actions. He wasn't thinking about the money. He couldn't. The $10,000 felt like an alien object in his life, a problem for a future he couldn't yet imagine. His mind was consumed by the man. Mitch. A history teacher. A husband and a father. A Marine who had lost everything and had been ready to follow his family into the darkness. A profound sense of responsibility settled over Arthur. This wasn't a transaction that was finished. A life had been saved, but a life still had to be lived. The money felt less like a reward and more like a commission, a sacred trust. The next morning, after a breakfast of crackers and a newfound sense of purpose, Arthur didn't go to the bank. He picked up the phone and called the public affairs office at Fort Hastings, the number the captain had left him. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he said, his voice firm. "You delivered something to me last night on behalf of Mitch Daly. I need to see him. I just want to talk to him. I need him to know he isn't alone in this." The officer on the other end was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sergeant, that story has made an impression on us here. Let me see what I can do." What Arthur didn't know was that the story was already spreading. The captain, deeply moved, had shared a de-identified version of the events on a private Facebook page for the local Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, post. He wrote about an old Army sergeant giving his last few dollars to a homeless Marine, and the life-altering impact it had. The post exploded. Comments flooded in. "This is the code we live by." "Hua," from an old infantryman. "That Army sergeant is a credit to the uniform." "Semper Fi," from a young Marine. "Someone find these two men. We need to help them," from a Navy vet. The story became a small, powerful legend in the local veteran community within hours, a testament to an ethos that civilians often admired but rarely understood. 2 days later, the VA liaison officer called Arthur. Mitch had agreed to a meeting. They met in a quiet, sunlit room at the VA support center. Mitch was wearing clean clothes and was freshly shaven. He looked fragile, like a man relearning how to stand on his own 2 feet, but the haunted, vacant look in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a shy, uncertain light. When Arthur walked in, all the words he had prepared vanished. He saw not a project or a responsibility, but a brother. Mitch saw him at the same time, and his eyes filled with tears. He stood up, and the two old soldiers, an army man and a marine, met in the middle of the room and embraced, a long, silent hug that spoke of shared battles, shared losses, and a shared, unbreakable bond. They sat and talked for over an hour. They didn't talk about the money. They talked about their service, Arthur in the jungles of Vietnam, Mitch in the deserts of the First Gulf War. They talked about the women they had loved and lost. They talked about the difficulty of coming home, of trying to fit back into a world that hadn't seen what they'd seen, that didn't carry the ghosts they carried. In that small room, they weren't a charity case and a savior. They were just two men, two veterans, who had found each other in the dark. The check sat on Arthur's kitchen table for a week, untouched. It was a symbol, a catalyst, but to both him and Mitch, it felt like it belonged to a larger purpose. During one of their now daily coffee meetings, Arthur pushed it across the table. "This is ours," Arthur said simply. "Not mine, not yours. Ours. We need to decide what to do with it." Mitch looked at the check, then at Arthur. For the first time in a long time, his training as a teacher, a leader, resurfaced. "A single act of support saved me," Mitch said, his voice gaining strength. "What if we could make that a system? What if we could make sure no other veteran in this town ever feels as invisible as I did?" The idea took root and grew with astonishing speed. With the guidance of the VA liaison and the enthusiastic support of the VFW post, they used the $10,000 as seed money. They filed for nonprofit status and founded the Honor Watch Project. Their mission was simple and direct, veteran-to-veteran support. It wasn't a faceless charity. It was a network. They used the funds to create emergency care packages, a hot meal voucher, a prepaid phone card, warm socks, and a card with a crisis hotline number. But the most important part was the delivery. Volunteers, all of them veterans, would be dispatched to find and connect with those who had fallen through the cracks. It wasn't about a handout, it was about a handshake, a conversation, a reminder that they were still part of the brotherhood. The news of the project spread through Millersville. The young, arrogant owner of the bakery heard the full story from a VFW member who came into his shop. Shame and awe washed over him. The next day, he found Arthur and apologized, his earlier arrogance replaced by a humbling respect. He pledged to donate all of his day-old bread and pastries to the Honor Watch Project and became one of their most dedicated civilian volunteers, his transformation a small but significant symbol of the community's changing heart. The project became a fixture of the town. Arthur, once a lonely widower, was now at the center of a bustling community, his days filled with purpose. He managed the logistics, his old sergeant skills for organization proving invaluable. Mitch began to lead peer support groups, his experiences giving him a unique ability to connect with others struggling with PTSD and grief. He was teaching again, his subject now being hope. One crisp afternoon, a few months after it all began, Arthur and Mitch stood outside their small, donated office space, watching a volunteer help another veteran into a warm coat. The man's shoulders, once hunched in defeat, straightened just a little. Arthur was no longer just a retired sergeant living on a pension. Mitch was no longer an invisible ghost on a sidewalk. They were guardians of a promise, commanders of a small, vital army of hope. Arthur looked at Mitch, who smiled back, the light in his eyes now bright and steady. He realized the truth of that fateful day. He hadn't just given away $5. He had made an investment in the foundational principle of his entire life, and the return was all around him, in the warmth of a donated coat, in the gratitude of a shared meal, in the simple, profound act of one brother looking out for another. A single act of kindness can reignite a person's hope and even spark a new mission. There are silent heroes all around us, performing small acts of honor every day. Have you seen one in your community? Share their story in the comments below, and let's pay tribute to all those who have served. Comment, respect, for all of them.